Is White Widow the best card this month? Maybe, I don't know, probably. But look at this variant. This card could be trash and I'm still getting it.
Is it worth it?
What's up, nerds? Let's jump straight in. White Widow is a 2 energy 2 power card that reads on reveal, add a Widow's Kiss to your opponent's side of this location. The Widow's Kiss reads ongoing, this has -4 power. Disable this ability if your side of this location is full. Overall impressions. This card might not be as good as everyone says it is, but I don't think so. I think it is. I just don't think this card is going to be disappointing at all. Mostly because worst case scenario, it's decent. Best case scenario, it's super annoying. And I think that's how you should rate this card. Worst case scenario, as bad as this card gets, it's a 2 energy 2 power card that puts a rock on the opponent's side of the field. That's super good because filling up one spot on the opponent's side of the board is, let's say, minimum 2 power. So at worst, this card is a 2/4. But I think the ceiling of this card is so high, and I think her effect could be annoying enough to where decks that just aren't doing junk, clog, clutter stuff are willing to run her anyways. All right, let's get into the mechanics of White Widow. The first thing here is the Widow's Kiss is ongoing. There's not really any big interactions or things that are going to result from this, but it is something to point out because Enchantress, Spectrum, Rogue, there's cards that will interact with the Widow's Kiss that you might not think about. The second thing to point out is the Widow's Kiss is going to be affected just like a regular card would. Anything that alters stats, Hazmat, Captain America even, who plays that, but if you do, it will take Widow's Kiss into account. And sort of like the first point, it's just something that does need to be pointed out. The third point here is the Widow's Kiss says this ability is disabled. Now that doesn't mean the text gets removed. It means the -4 goes away. That is relevant with cards like Patriot and just niche scenarios that I'm probably not thinking of off the top of my head. But when you fill up the side of the location that has the Widow's Kiss, the text doesn't disappear on the card. It's just the power change simply goes away. And then the last point I have here is locations. There's nothing really too tricky here, but just when you're thinking about the card, when you're thinking about picking it up, and the effect she can have on games, think about locations. The most obvious things to point out here is if you play White Widow on turn 2 at a Space Throne, GG, it will fill up that side of the opponent's board. They can't play anything there. However, it technically would be a 0 power card because that side of the location is full, therefore disabling the text of the Widow's Kiss. All right, what are the good parts about White Widow? I was gonna say Black Widow. That's not that card. This is White Widow. Now the first thing we have here is it feels a needed energy slot space in junk archetypes. Junk archetypes have your 3 drops. You have Debris or Green Goblin. On the 4 you have Sentry. On 5 you have Hobgoblin, Annihilus. Other cards, Cannonball is good in junk right now. But as far as 2 energy goes, there isn't really a card that like you actively are like, oh yes, this is awesome. White Widow fills that slot. And also, this is minor, but I think it's interesting. White Widow actually makes Mojo a very good card now, because Mojo, like in junk decks, it's cute, but really junk decks are more so like Annihilus stuff now. But with White Widow, you can put Mojo in like Annihilus decks, and I think Mojo is going to see a nice bump in play because of White Widow. The opponent's going to be encouraged to play stuff at that location. You have your Mojo there. It's a Mojo and a White Widow in the same deck. Basically guarantee that your Mojo is going to trigger. But anyways, to round out my point, and the 1-drops, they have Hood, Nebula, Titania. Junk decks have all the energy costs set except for 2. Now they have that. The second point here, the good part about White Widow, I will keep doing that in this video, I promise, is that even like when you put the Widow's Kiss on the side of the board, I already touched on this point earlier, even if her -4 goes away, that's fine. It's actually usually probably going to go away, the Widow's Kiss negative, but the fact that you're taking up a spot on the opponent's side of the board cannot be overstated, really. I stated earlier that's a bare minimum 2 power that you're getting rid of, that your opponent could potentially play there, and it only goes up from there. So even if the Widow's Kiss isn't giving the opponent a -4 ability, it's still very impactful. All right, the next point I have here is the Nebula effect. And now what I mean by this is when you put Nebula on the board, doesn't matter what the opponent's doing, they are going to alter how they play and react to different things in that game. If you have an Nebula down on turn 1 and you put it in the far right location, the opponent is going to be encouraged to play differently than what they probably would have wanted to play anyways. White Widow does the exact same thing, and it actually it probably is more annoying for the opponent than something like Nebula. Nebula, you can play stuff like Jeff and then move it out of there to stop Nebula from triggering. Both White Widow, it's going to change how the opponent plays, and there's no upside for them really, other than having a location, a spot on their board taken up. And then the last point here is this card is super versatile. So obviously it's good in junk decks, but honestly, I think this card could go in like almost anything that isn't a combo deck, and you'll probably be moderately happy with. This isn't the best comparison, but Scorpion is a pretty good one. I know people don't really play Scorpion anymore, but back in my day, Scorpion used to be like just a default 2-drop in a lot of decks. And my point here is that Scorpion hits the opponent's cards with negative power, and usually you only want to do that if you're getting some sort of payoff nowadays, like Abomination in the Evo Afflict decks. But I think Widow's like the newer, better version of that type of card. Just the 2-drop that you just want to put in a deck because worst case scenario, it's decent. Best case scenario, you're really screwing over your opponent. So outside of junk, I think it's going to be in mid-range decks, surfer decks. Hell, any deck that isn't like a dedicated combo deck is probably going to try to at least play White Widow at some point. All right, what are the bad parts about White Widow? Just not really too many, to be honest. But the first point here is it's not that good late in the game. Turn 5 and 6, White Widow's like meh, but you could say that about like any 1 or 2-drop, or most 1 and 2-drops that like if you don't get them down early, they're just sort of mediocre. So technically it's a bad aspect of the card and a weakness to it, but it's not that bad, is it? Nah. Now the second part here is the potential for this card to be as good as everyone thinks. Let's just say it is, right? It's going to be a staple in multiple decks, which means you're going to have to spend 6k tokens or use 4 keys to get White Widow. That's not a downside of actually how the card plays, but it is a downside of the card and you having to get it potentially. Because like I said, if it is as good as she seems, and she goes in like 50% of the mid-range decks out there, and she goes in every junk deck that's ever created from here on out, you're gonna have to shell out for this card. So that sort of sucks. Anyways, let's head to some deck lists. Yep. All right, potential deck, White Widow. This isn't anything special. I just wanted to make something that wasn't a dedicated like junk list with Mojo and Goblins and stuff like that. That's obvious, those decks build themselves, so I just want to do something a little bit different and show you like a good example of, say, like a mid-range deck I was talking about earlier. We have the typical Annihilus package with Hood, Sentry, Annihilus. Yay, you're clogging the opponent with those cards. And then we're running Darkhawk stuff, which also encourages you to play Black Widow. So now you got both the Widows in here, and those are technically filling up sides of the opponent's spots on the board. Black Widow helps your Darkhawk, it helps the junk game plan. White Widow is just really solid here. We have Beast to be able to bounce White Widow, Korg, Rockslide, Black Widow into your hand and do it again. That will be super annoying. I think I cannot overstate how annoying Beast and White Widow are potentially. We all remember how annoying Black Widow was when it was a 2 energy 1 power card with Beast. With White Widow, this is going to get out of hand. And then we got Korg and Rockslide, Kitty Pryde, Angela just to get some power and help out our Darkhawk. All right, spotlight recommendation on whether or not you should spend keys, tokens, whatever. So it is 6k tokens. So as far as keys go, you could get Nico Minoru or Snowguard. Now, Snowguard is really only good in low-key, but it's a decent card. Nico is a very flexible 1-drop that is sort of like White Widow. It just goes in a bunch of different decks. It makes some decks rather than others, like she's absolutely essential in them. Like Destroy, you need Nico. If you want to play Phoenix Force, you need Nico. So my point is Nico's really good. And White Widow's probably going to be very good. And then Snowguard is okay. Snowguard has replacements. Nico and White Widow won't. So as far as spending keys go, I think I could confidently say just go for it. If you have 4 keys, absolutely go for it. Even if you have 3 keys, I would never say this ever, but if you have like 3 keys and you don't have Nico and White Widow, go for that too, because you're getting something that you want. And then for collector's tokens, now I pretty much always say card has to be like Thanos level, at least former Thanos, or high evolutionary level for you to spend 6k tokens on it. I think White Widow has just crossed that. It's just over the bar of like, is this good enough to actually spend tokens on it? And I think she might be. She might not be, and you know, maybe it's not as good and versatile as I think it is, which would suck to spend 6k tokens on it. But I still don't think you're really going to be too bummed out if you do spend 6k tokens on this card, even if she's not as good as she seems. I think an easier and better way to say this, and a more sure way to say this, is if you have a Nihilus, then absolutely get White Widow. You're going to need her. If you don't have a Nihilus, maybe wait a couple days and see. All right, that's the review. Just to wrap it up, White Widow is great. I think it's going to be super versatile. You should probably get it. If you have a Nihilus, you should absolutely get it. Keys, tokens, whatever, pick her up. If you don't have a Nihilus, maybe wait a day or two, but that's it. Thank you so much for watching. See you next video. Later, nerds.